In this video, I'll demonstrate how to insert, update, and delete data in a database. I trust that you've already read the lesson text from Lesson 20. It explains that while data binding is convenient, it's not useful in every scenario for our applications. There will be applications where we'll want to have more flexibility with how we insert, update, and delete data, and display data for that matter. And so we'll need to use a more professional approach to retrieving and manipulating data in our databases. Additionally, we'll find out more information about the command objects parameters collection and the parameter objects that we'll use in this video. So I really recommend that you take a few moments, if you haven't already, to read the lesson text for Lesson 20. If you've already done that, we can continue on to actually demonstrate the use of those techniques in our application. I've already taken the liberty of creating a new WinForms application called Lesson 20 in my Begin 1 folder on my C drive. This example is going to be rather large, so instead of watching me type each and every line of code and name all the controls on a form, I'm going to stop the recording at certain points, do some work, and then start recording again, and I'll explain what I did and why I did it. The first step that I want to take is to actually design the form that we'll use for our application. Our application will manipulate information in the shipper's database, or rather the shipper's table in the Northwind database. So here I've simply designed my form in order to give each field within the shipper's table of the Northwind database a text box. And we'll use these text boxes for different purposes. For example, here you'll type in a shipper ID and click the Find button, and it will retrieve the results from the database and display them in the company name text box and the phone text box as well. The other functionality we'll want for our application is to be able to click a new button. It will assign a new shipper ID and will allow us to fill in a new company name, a new phone number. At that point, we'll click the Save button, and it will insert that record into our database. Or if we are manipulating an existing record, for example, if we put the number 2 here and then click Find, and it finds the record for shipper ID number 2, and we start changing the information, the company name and the phone, we'll click the same Save button, and this time it'll operate as an update function within our database to change the information for record 2, in this example, to the fields of information that we have displayed on our form. And finally, we'll use this delete button in order to remove records from our database. The next step will be to create a shipper component that will encapsulate all the functionality of inserting, updating, and deleting shipper records in the Northwind database. So I'll come over here and select Add Component. And I selected a component class rather than a regular class because the component class will give us the opportunity to drag and drop visual items from the toolbox onto it. So we'll be able to drag a connection object, command objects, and so forth. That's the only difference. Now I'll go to my toolbox. I'm going to drag over a OLADB connection object. The first thing I'm going to do is change the name to con. And then I'm going to select my database reference that I've set up already in my data connections in the Server Explorer. And that will automatically put the connection string in there for us so we don't have to type all that out. The next thing I'm going to do is go to my toolbox and drag over a command object, an OLADB command object. And I'll use this for the select. I'm also going to set the connection to our existing connection object. And then in the command text, I'm going to click the ellipsis, which gives us the query builder window. We want the shipper, so I'm going to click Add there. And what I'm going to do is select all columns from shippers. I'm going to add a where clause here in the SQL pane of the query builder. And to make sure that I typed it correctly, I'm just going to put my mouse cursor in another pane. Just click outside of the SQL pane, and it'll format it a little bit for us, but ultimately it'll be correct. If you see what it does for us, it puts in the criteria field of the shipper ID column the equal and then an open bracket at symbol telling it that it's a parameter, shipper ID, close bracket. Now, in theory, you should be able to type that into criteria. Unfortunately, in practice, it sometimes puts those in single quotes and treats them as a literal string. So I found the greatest success whenever I type directly into the SQL pane. You might have a different experience, so you may want to experiment with that. So what I've done is added a where clause where we'll pass in the variable shipper ID so that we only select one row of our shippers table where the shipper ID in our table equals the shipper ID that we pass in through our input parameter variable. So now our select command is set up. Let's go on to the next command object. We'll go back and pull another command object, OLEDB command object, and put it on our designer. And this one we'll call cmd delete. Additionally, in the connection, I'm going to select our con object that we've already created. In the command text, I'll click the ellipsis and I'll select my shippers table. And then I want to change the type of query to a delete statement. And I'll put the same where clause in, where shipper ID equals shipper ID. In delete statements, it's so important to use a where clause. If you forget, you'll delete every row from the database. So be very careful whenever you work with delete statements. I'm going to click in another pane to see if it formats it correctly. It seems to like it just fine. So we're okay to go there. And now let's add one more command object to our designer interface. This time, we'll create an insert command. The first thing I'm going to do is set the connection to our existing connection object. And then select the shippers table. I'm going to change this type into an insert into statement, and I'm simply going to paste a query that I have already created and make sure that it formats it correctly and everything looks great. We'll click OK. Now I'm not going to create a command object for the update statement. I'm going to do something special with that to show you that there is more than one way to skin a cat and to create commands in your applications, a non-visual way, more code intensive. And this will hopefully be an exercise to show you what can be done purely from code and not using the visual designers. But we definitely have enough here to get started. So what I'm going to do is double click on my design surface to get to the code behind view. Since this is the shippers class, I want to represent a single shipper's information therein. So I'm going to have three properties: the shipper ID, the company name, and the phone number that will closely mimic our database whose shippers table has a shipper ID, company name, and phone field. So I'm going to go ahead and paste in some code that'll do this. Here I have three private member variables: shipper ID, company name, and phone, which I initialize to empty strings and the value 0. This is actually important because I'm going to key off of this to determine whether or not I'll save it, or whether I'll insert or update based on clicking the Save button. We'll talk about that more in just a moment. And then here we have three public properties: shipper ID, company name, and phone. You should be familiar with this from previous lessons on object-oriented development. The first functionality that I want to enable is to be able to grab an existing shipper from the database and display him onto the form. So I've created a public method called getShipper where you pass in the shipper ID. It will open the connection to the database. It will populate the parameters collection, or rather one item within the parameters collection that has the ID of @ShipperID, and we'll set the value to the value that was passed into our method, shipper's ID. So what this will do is select or find the record in our database that matches what the user typed in. So if they type in the number 2, we'll go to the database, retrieve the record where the shipper ID equals number 2, and then once we execute that select command, we'll read our data reader and start placing values from the data reader into our private member variables, in this case shipper ID, company name, and phone. And close everything up when we're finished. So let's go over to our form and double click our Find button, since that's the functionality we'll enable first. First thing I need to do is create a private instance of the shipper object for use within my form. Then whenever somebody clicks the Find button, what we'll do is create a new instance of the shipper object and overwrite what's currently in the private member variable called shipper. Now I placed this private member variable outside of my Find button click event because I'm going to need that in the other parts of the application, like when somebody clicks on delete or save, we want to act on the current shipper that's being displayed on the screen. So that's why I keep a private instance scoped at a level where I can access it from other members of the same class. So I do some validation just to make sure that what the user typed in is actually a numeric value. I evaluate the text property of the txt shipper ID text box, and then I use our instance of our mShipper object, or our shipper object, and call the getShipper method that we just created a moment ago, passing in whatever the user typed in, for example the number 2. If we're successful, then what we should receive back is a populated mShipper object. So now it has the shipper ID, the company name, and the phone properties all populated, which we then display in the text box. Finally, I do some state management with our buttons. I want to enable the button delete and the button save, which by default have been disabled in their properties. Now, despite all of this work that I've done, our application will still break, and I'll show you why just in a moment, because it's a common mistake whenever using access databases within your applications. So here I'm going to type in the number 2 and click the Find button, and I'll get an exception that says that the index is out of range. An OLADB parameter with parameter name shipper ID is not contained by this OLADB parameter collection. What happened here? Well, although we created our select command using as command text, or within the command text, a moniker that we designated to be a parameter, we still need to add that to a parameters collection. So I'll click on the ellipsis here and click the Add button, and we'll call this shipper ID, and we'll set the source column to shipper ID and click OK. Now, by making that simple change, let's run our application and see if it works this time. So we'll type in the number 2 and click Find. And this time when we do, notice that a company name and phone number appear. So our Find function actually worked. Let's shut down this application and continue on. So that means for each of our command objects that use parameters, we're going to have to modify the parameters collection. So let's start with our insert command. The first thing we'll do is add the company name parameter and set its source column the company name. And then we'll add another one called phone. Let's do the same thing for delete. If you recall from our query builder session that the only parameter we have here is the shipper ID. So we'll go to our parameters collection, click the Add button, type in shipper ID, set the source column to the same, and click OK. Now we're ready to move on. The first functionality I want to enable is the saving button on our form. Where's that? Here we go. The save button. So when somebody clicks save, we'll either insert a new record or update an existing record based on the data that's in our form. So let's go to our shippers component and add a new public method. Here I have public sub save shipper, and we will use the current value of our private member variable mShipper to determine whether this is a brand new record in the database, in which case the shipper ID will be set to 0, or if we should just update an existing shipper record, in which case the shipper ID would be set to whatever that particular record was. So we're going to call out to two additional methods of our class to either insert the shipper or update the shipper. In the case of inserting a new shipper, we'll simply modify the parameters. We'll set the value of the parameters, rather, the company name parameter and the phone parameter to company name and phone, respectively, that we have stored within our private member variables. We'll open up a connection to the database, and then we will execute non-query, because we're not retrieving information back from the database. So we're not querying the database, we're merely executing a command that we want to insert a row of data using our insert command object. We can also optionally retrieve back the number of rows that were affected by this command. This should equal 1 if we were successful. If it equals 0, then there was a problem. So we could add some if-then-else code on this line, on line 153, if we wanted to, in order to check to see how effective it was. If it wasn't, then we can throw an exception. We'll talk about exceptions, I believe, in lesson 21 or 22. So at any rate, this private method, insert shipper, will insert a new record based on the values that are currently in the private member variables for company name and phone. Now we need to address the update shipper. If you recall, we did not create a shipper command here, and that's because I wanted to show you how to do all this in code. Everything that we dragged and dropped onto the design surface, it's also a good idea to know that you can do this solely in code if you want to. So I'm going to paste in some code to show you how we would create an update shipper. And so there's a lot here to talk about. Let's take our time. Move this over. I've created a new instance of the oladb.oladb command object. So dim, and I'm going to call this cmd update to follow our convention of naming commands, as new oladb.oladb command. I set the connection object to our reference, our connection object reference. I set the command type to text, which we never had to change when using the visual style, because that was the what it was set to by default. And then I set the command text. Now we don't have a query builder to rely on. We're just going to type in straight SQL. And notice that the notation is a little bit different here as well. Update shippers, set company name equal to question mark, phone equal to question mark, where shipper ID equals question mark. Now you might say, well, wow, that's a far cry from using that. What you'd expect to see here maybe is company name, and you could even put some brackets around it. And that's one way to do it. This question mark notation is another way. There is one caveat when using the question mark notation, and that's this. The order that they're defined in our SQL statement has to be the order that they're created and added to the command object's parameters collection. So here we're going to dimension P1 as a new oladb parameter object. We're going to name it company name and set its type, its size, and its field that it's associated with using this constructor. And we'll do the same thing for the phone and for the shipper ID. And again, they have to be in the proper order whenever we add them. Now, the order that we actually create them, I could put P3 up here first. That doesn't matter. But the order that they get added to the parameters collection is extremely important. Before I add those parameters, I'm going to set their value equal to whatever our private member variables are. So in this case, I set the P1, since it's company name, I set it to our private member variable M underscore company name. And this is very much analogous to what we've done here in these two lines of code back in the insert shipper method. Once we've added all the parameters to the parameter collection, then we can open up a connection. If we want to retrieve the rows affected, we certainly can. But the most important aspect of this is calling the execute non-query method of our update command. And finally, closing the connection. So now that we've added that code to our shippers component, let's go into our form and write some code. Whenever somebody clicks the button, we want to call our save shipper method on our shipper component. So let us get a little tricky here, and that would entail asking to make sure, are you sure you want to save your changes? So I've popped up a message box with some options shown. Use the yes, no buttons, and from an icon perspective, use a little question mark on there. And we'll see the result as a dialog result object, which we can then check if the result equals yes. So if they click the yes button on our message box, then we'll go ahead and call the save shipper method of our private instance of the shipper object. And then what we can do is update our txt shipper ID. So we'll want to update this text box with the new ID that will be assigned to it once an insert happens in the database, that we can get by just referencing it, referencing the shipper ID property. And then finally what we'll do is, now that we've clicked the save button, we want to disable the save button. So there's one other thing that we need to do here, and that is whenever anybody types in something new to either the txt company name text box or the txt phone text box, then we want to do two things. We want to set the company name to whatever was typed into the text box and set that to our object, our shipper object's company name property, and then enable the save button. So as soon as somebody types in something, we know we're into a save or into a dirty state, that we need to prompt the user to actually save their work. And so we'll do the same thing here. Whenever somebody types something into the txt phone text box, then we'll want to set that property on our shipper object and then enable our save button. Is yes. So let's go ahead and run our application. First of all, let's find a record, and then let's update it by changing United Packages. We'll just remove the S. Notice when I did that, that the save button became enabled because we made a change to the company name field, and we added some code into the text change property of our text box that if that happens, then we want to enable the save button. So let's go ahead and click Save Now. It asks, are you sure you want to save your changes? We'll click Yes. Now let's test that by exiting the application and coming right back into it. And let's make sure that the S is gone. So let's type in the number 2, click Find, and the S is gone. We have successfully updated the shipper record. Now let's test the new functionality. So let's click on the New button. I think we forgot to write some code there. So let's go back and find our form. There we go. Double click the new button and write some code in here. And I'm just going to paste some code I've already created. So we create a new instance of the shipper object and assign it to our private member variable. Then we set the text boxes to the values of our mShipper object. However, let me suggest that since we just created a brand new one, this will be what? It'll be the value 0, because remember we created some initialization code to set shipper ID equal to 0 and to set the company name to a blank string and phone as a blank string. So the initialization will be used here so that we don't have to code too much knowledge, I guess you'd say, into the interface to know what the initial values for shipper ID, company name, and phone should be. Just a small point, but I've seen a lot of people do something like this, and that would be bad, because now you've tightly coupled knowledge about the shipper object, too much knowledge, into the interface. And then once we click the new button, we also want to disable the delete button and disable the save button. Now when somebody starts typing into either the company name or phone fields, it will enable the save button again. So that's desired functionality. Now that we've added some code in our new buttons click event, let's run our application again. I click the new button, so that gives us a shipper ID of 0, and it clears out everything in the company name and phone. And so we'll go Bob's Shipping, and then we'll set as the phone number just some random number and click the Save button. Are you sure you want to save the changes? Yes. So now to check to make sure that we've actually successfully created a new record, I'm going to double click and look at the contents of the database table. Now if you have, I believe it is the professional version, you might have this functionality. Definitely in the Learning Edition of Visual Basic.net you do not have this ability. You'll have to use Microsoft Access to open up the database and look at it. Now you notice that I have two records here that are exactly the same. That's because I just happened to type in the exact same data twice while I was testing this functionality. But it did insert a new record called Bob Shipping, and so that's all we really wanted to take a look and make sure that it worked. Now the final bit of functionality we want to enable is our delete button. So let's go here to our delete button, double click it, and add some code here. Actually, we need to add the delete functionality to our component first. So let's go to our shippers.vb class, and at the very bottom we'll add a new method called delete shipper. And again, we will reference our parameters collection, one parameter in particular called shipper ID, set it to the value of the current shipper ID in our object, open up a connection, call execute non-query, and close the connection. Pretty easy from our components perspective. Let's take a look now what we need to do for the button click event for the delete button. And so we'll paste in some code here. Now I've taken the similar approach to the save button, and that is to display a message box, and we'll put something like this: are you sure you want to delete this shipper? And then delete shipper. That'll show up in the caption at the very top of the message box. And we'll check the result, whether they clicked yes or no. If they clicked yes, then we will call the delete shipper method. Now I may have violated the very thing that I told you not to do just a moment ago and cleared out all of the text strings after the delete has occurred. And so I may have to rethink how I want to approach that. Do I want to create a brand new shipper object and then set it these text fields equal to the new shipper object's values? I'm not sure, so I'm just going to leave that the way it is for right now, but I think you get the idea. Also, we then disabled the delete button and the save button since we're not currently working with a specific shipper object at the moment. Let's test this functionality as well and try to delete the shipper that we just added. So I'm going to click the Bob shipping and I'm going to click the delete button. Are you sure you want to delete this shipper? Yes. So let's look at our database to see if that is now gone, and it has been removed successfully from our database. So we've learned quite a bit in this lesson on how to create a more professional application than what we've done in the past. We were able to separate the business rules out into their own class, or rather their own component, the shipper's component. So we have some separation between the business logic and the data layer from the actual presentation layer. Additionally, we introduced some state management so that whenever we enable and disable buttons based on the current state of the data that's being displayed before us, we enable certain buttons based on what how the user is interacting with the application. But most importantly, what we wanted to demonstrate was how to insert, update, and delete data, and how to do that using the parameters collection of the command objects. And remember, we used this collection editor to add parameters, and then within our code we populated those parameters values with values that were in our objects. As always, I hope this lesson was helpful. Thank you.